What happens when a pastor's daughter brings her boyfriend to Easter dinner uninvited? Hannah's father had her whole life arranged before I came into the picture. He ran a church on the edge of town and ran his house the same way. At dinner, he would point at the salt and her mother slid it down without a word. He would say, "We'll pray now," and every head dropped before he finished the sentence. He had also picked the boy he expected Hannah to marry, which was the strangest part of the whole thing. A kid named Wyatt whose family wrote the biggest check to the church every year. Now that's a good family, Hannah's dad liked to say, and in his house that closed the matter. Then something happened he hadn't accounted for. Hannah met me. I had not grown up in his church. My parents never put their name on the new roof or the new vans, but Hannah fell for my charms anyway, and her father heard about me before he ever met me. The first thing he said was, "I don't want that boy's shoes on my carpet, ever." When Hannah brought my name up at the table, he set down his fork. "You come from a certain kind of home. You will not lower yourself." He never once said my name. For a whole year I was that boy, or him, or the situation. Hannah kept asking him to meet me just one single time. "There's nothing to meet," he told her. "I already know the type." She would come out to my car after those dinners with red eyes and hands that would not stop shaking. When Easter came, he stood at the head of the table and announced that Wyatt and his parents would be joining them, and that Hannah should wear the blue dress and act like a young woman with a future. He had it all arranged. Wyatt would sit beside Hannah in front of the whole family while everyone watched his plan click into place. What he did not know was that Hannah had already taken me to meet the one man he could never argue with. Her grandfather had built that church himself decades back, with his own savings and his own hands. He had handed the pulpit to her father when his knees gave out, but he still ran the church board, and the congregation still leaned toward whatever the old man said. A few weeks before Easter, Hannah drove me out to his house without telling a soul. We sat on his porch for 3 hours while he asked me real questions and waited for the real answers. Near the end, he leaned over and said, "You're the first one she's ever brought who talks about her instead of at her." At the door, he shook my hand. "You're welcome at my table any day, son." Nobody in the family knew the visit ever happened. We kept it quiet, because if her father caught wind of it, he would crush it before it grew into anything. When Easter Sunday came, Hannah made up her mind. "I'm done hiding you," she said, and asked me to come even though her father had forbidden it. So I put on my one good shirt and went. Her father opened the door, saw me standing behind Hannah, and did not step aside. His hand stayed flat on the doorframe. "This is a family meal. You were not invited." Hannah stepped back out beside me. "If he's not welcome, neither am I." Wyatt and his parents were already watching from the dining room. He did not want a scene in front of them, so he waved me in and pointed at a folding chair shoved against the wall. Everyone else had the good china and a seat at the table. He set a paper plate down in front of me himself, slow and deliberate, making sure I understood what it meant. During grace, he kept his eyes open and aimed them straight at me. "Lord, guard this family from the influences of the world." Then he decided to put on a show. "Since you're here, maybe you can tell the table what Romans says about honoring your parents." He leaned back and folded his arms. I answered it. Chapter and verse, plain and correct. He blinked. "Anyone can memorize a line," he said, and flicked his hand. Wyatt smirked into his napkin. Her father set both hands flat on the table. "This house has a standard. You will never reach it, no matter how many verses you parrot. Hannah, you have a choice to make right now at this table. End this foolishness, or walk out with him and don't bother coming back." That was when the doorbell rang. Her father stood up smiling, because he knew exactly who it was. He had saved the seat of honor at his right hand all along. The door opened. He expected his own father to walk in and admire the perfect table. Wyatt beside Hannah, the right family on display. Instead, the old man stepped inside, swept his eyes across the room, and the second he found me on that folding chair, his whole face opened up. There he is. He crossed the room and shook my hand like we were old friends, then turned to the table. Why on earth is he stuck in the corner with a paper plate? Her father froze by the open door. The old man looked straight at him. "I asked you a question. This young man happens to be someone I think the world of. Why is he tucked away like a stranger in your house?" Chuck didn't wait for an answer. He walked over, grabbed the folding chair, and dragged it right up to the table, metal legs scraping across the floor loud enough to make everyone flinch. Then he looked at the paper plate in front of me, picked it up, carried it to the trash by the counter, opened the cabinet where the good china was, and set a real plate, a real glass, and real silverware down in front of me himself. He lined up the fork and knife the way you do when you actually care about the person sitting there. Then he turned to Andres, who was still standing by the door like somebody had nailed his feet to the floor. "You serve a man at your table with a paper plate," Chuck said, his voice steady and low, "the kind that fills a room without trying. That tells me more about you than it tells me about him." The room went dead silent. I mean the kind of quiet where you can hear the clock on the wall and the ice settling in somebody's glass. Eloisa had her hands folded in her lap and would not look up. Her fingers were laced so tight her knuckles were pale. Across the table, Maximilian and Liv traded a quick look, the kind married people give each other when they both know something has gone wrong, but neither wants to be the first to say it. Wyatt was staring at a spot on the tablecloth like it was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. Andres straightened his tie and forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes. "Dad, you don't know the full picture here," he said, using the calm pastor tone, the one he probably used on Sunday mornings when somebody in the congregation asked a question he didn't like. "This boy is not from a family that shares our values. I'm trying to protect Hannah." He put his hand out toward Wyatt like he was presenting a prize on a game show. "Wyatt's family has been part of this church since the beginning. They understand what we're building here." He said it like that settled things, like he had made his case and the jury should go home. But Chuck wasn't a jury, and Chuck wasn't going home. The old man pulled out a chair and sat down right next to me. Not the seat of honor Andres had saved for him, just the chair next to the boy Andres wanted gone. He set his hands flat on the table and looked across at Wyatt. "Son," Chuck said, "tell me one thing about Hannah that has nothing to do with this church or this family." Wyatt's mouth opened, his lips parted, and he started to form a word, and then nothing came out. His eyes went sideways to his father the way a kid looks at a parent during a spelling bee when he doesn't know the answer. Maximilian cleared his throat and studied his plate. Liv shifted in her seat. Wyatt closed his mouth, then opened it again. Still nothing. The silence stretched for 5 seconds but felt like 5 minutes. Everyone at that table could feel it. Chuck nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he already knew what was going to happen, but wanted everyone else to see it too. "That's what I figured," he said. Then he turned to me. "Same question." I didn't have to think about it. The words came because I wasn't pulling from a coached list. I was pulling from a year of actually knowing her. "She sketches," I said. "She keeps a notebook in her car, shoved under the passenger seat, because she's afraid people will think it's silly. She draws buildings mostly, old ones with all the detail work on the front. She stops for every stray cat she sees on the road, even if it makes her late. One time she drove 40 minutes in a bad rainstorm because a friend from work was sick and didn't have anyone else to bring her soup. She didn't tell anybody she did it. I only found out because her friend mentioned it weeks later. I wasn't trying to make a speech. I was just talking about the girl I loved, and it came out easy because it was true." Chuck listened to every word without interrupting. When I finished, he turned and looked at Andres. The room was so still, I could hear Eloisa breathing from the other end of the table. "That boy knows your daughter," Chuck said, pointing at me. Then he pointed at Wyatt. "This one does." doesn't. He let that sit for a second before he finished. So what exactly are you protecting her from? Andres stood up slowly from near the door. He walked to the table, planted his feet, and looked his own father right in the face. With all respect, Dad, he said, and the way he said respect made it sound like a word he had to push through his teeth. You handed this church to me. You handed this family to me. And I will not have you walk into my house and undermine me at my own table. The calm in his voice was the scared kind, the kind that holds itself together by a thread. Then he turned to me. You need to leave. Right now. This is my home. Hannah was on her feet before the last word left his mouth. Her chair scraped back hard. If he leaves, I leave. I already told you that. Andres turned on her and pointed his finger, the way a parent points at a child who is about to be in serious trouble. Sit down, Hannah. You are making a scene in front of guests. But Hannah didn't sit. She stood right where she was, chin up, hands flat on the table, and did not move an inch. I looked at Hannah standing there, and I looked at Eloisa at the other end of the table with her hands pressed together and tears sitting in her eyes, and something in my chest just gave. Not the angry kind of giving, the tired kind. So I stood up and I said, Hannah, it's okay. I'll go. I don't want to be the reason your family tears itself apart. I meant it. I started walking toward the front door. I got all the way to the knob and had my hand on it when Chuck's voice came from behind me like a wall. Son, don't you move. I stopped with my hand still on the knob. Leaving is exactly what he wants you to do, Chuck said from his chair. He didn't need to stand for his voice to fill the room. He's been trying to make you disappear for a year. Don't help him do it. I stood there for what felt like a long time. Part of me wanted to turn the knob and walk out into the cool air and let the whole mess sort itself out without me in the middle of it. But Chuck was right. If I left, Andres won. Not just tonight, but for good. He would tell Hannah I proved his point, that I ran when things got hard. And the next time she tried to fight for us, she would remember that I didn't fight for myself. So I let go of the doorknob, turned around, and stayed. That's when Wyatt decided it was his turn. He walked around the table to where Hannah was standing and put his hand on her arm, gentle, like he had the right. Hannah, come on. Let's just sit down and have a nice meal. Your dad's right. This is getting out of hand. Hannah looked at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at his face, and she pulled her arm away so fast he almost lost his balance. Don't touch me. You and I have spoken maybe 10 times in our entire lives. You don't get to act like you know me. Wyatt's face went red from his collar all the way to his ears. He stood there with his hand still out where her arm used to be and had nothing. No comeback, no smooth line, nothing. Behind him, Liv stood up, purse already in hand. Well, I never. We didn't come here to be insulted. The room was coming apart, and Andres knew it. He turned to Chuck, voice louder now, more desperate even though he was trying to sound strong. You want to talk about what's best for Hannah? Fine. Let's talk about what keeps this church running. Let's talk about who funds the youth program, the mission trips, the new building. He swung his arm and pointed straight at Maximilian, who was still sitting at the table looking like he wished he was anywhere else on earth. That family, Andres said. That family has given more to our church than anyone. And you want me to spit in their face so some boy with nothing can sit at my table? The room went so still it felt like time stopped, because everyone at that table, including Andres, heard what he just said. He didn't talk about Hannah's happiness. He didn't talk about God's plan or family values or any of what he had been hiding behind all night. He talked about money. He talked about checks and donations and what keeps the building running, and he did it while pointing at the family of the boy he had picked for his daughter to marry. Chuck's face changed. The frustration drained out of it and something colder, deeper moved in behind it. The look of a father who just heard his son say the one thing he had hoped he would never hear. So that's what this is, Chuck said, barely above a whisper. You're selling your daughter for a donation. The words landed on that table like a brick on glass. Andres' mouth opened. You could see him realize what he had done, see him try to reach back and grab those words out of the air, but they were already out, already sitting there in front of everybody. Eloisa covered her mouth with her hand, fingers pressed against her lips. Maximilian put both hands on the edge of the table and slowly pushed his chair back. He didn't stand yet, but the way he moved said everything. Even he looked uncomfortable. And this was the man whose family's donations Andres had just used as his whole argument. Andres moved fast, shifting into damage control. He held up both hands. That is not what I said. I said family matters. That loyalty matters. That commitment to the church matters. Don't twist my words, Dad. He was talking quickly now, almost tripping over himself, eyes flicking to Maximilian, calculating how much damage had been done and whether he could still fix it. Chuck shook his head slowly, the kind of shake that means the person has already made up their mind and isn't coming back from it. I didn't twist anything, Chuck said. You said it plain. You just didn't mean to. He turned to Maximilian and Liv, and his voice got softer. No disrespect to you folks, but my granddaughter is not a business deal, and I won't sit here and watch her get traded like one. Maximilian stood up, buttoned his jacket, and looked at Andres. I think we should go. This is a family matter, and frankly, I'm not comfortable with what just happened here. He put his hand on Wyatt's shoulder. The relief on Wyatt's face was so plain it would have been funny if the whole situation wasn't so messed up. He stood up fast, almost too fast. Liv grabbed her purse off the back of her chair and walked toward the door without a word. She had been ready to leave from the moment Chuck walked in. Andres went after them into the hall, whispering, I caught pieces of it, misunderstanding, and taken out of context, and you know how much your family means to this church. At the front door, Maximilian held up his hand, palm out. We'll talk later. Not today. He opened the door and walked out with his hand still on Wyatt's shoulder. The door closed behind all three of them, and the sound of it was like a period at the end of a sentence. Andre stood in the hallway with his hand still reaching toward a door that was already shut. His biggest donor had just walked out of his house on Easter Sunday, in front of his father, his wife, his daughter, and the boy he had been trying to get rid of for a year. When he walked back into the dining room, his face was the kind of red that starts at the neck and works its way up to the ears. Whatever mask he had been wearing all night was gone. There was no pastor smile, no calm voice, no scripture, just a man who had lost everything he built in the space of one meal and needed someone to blame. His eyes went to Hannah, then to Chuck, then to me. They stayed on me. He pointed his finger, and it was shaking. You did this. Everything was fine before you showed up. My church, my family, my daughter. You came in and poisoned all of it. I stepped forward, just far enough to close the distance so he could hear me clearly. I didn't poison anything, I said. My voice was steady. I didn't need to yell. I showed up, and you showed everyone exactly who you are. I didn't make you put out a paper plate. I didn't make you pick a husband for Hannah based on his family's checkbook. I didn't make you say what you said about Maximilian's donations. That was all you. Andres' jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He took one hard step toward me, the kind meant to make somebody back up. I didn't back up. Before he could take a second step, Chuck stood up from his chair. Slowly, the way a man stands when his knees don't cooperate the way they used to, but he's going to do it anyway because it matters. He didn't raise his voice. He said, "Andres, that's enough. Sit down." 5 words. Andres stopped like he walked into a wall. His jaw worked side to side. The righteousness he wore like a suit of armor every single day was gone. What was left was fear, real and plain, because he could see what was coming and he knew he had done all of it to himself. Chuck walked slowly around the table to the head of the table, the seat where Andres carved the turkey and led the prayers and made the rules. He didn't sit in it. He stood behind it and rested both hands on the back of the chair, gripping it the way a man grips a pulpit when he has something important to say. "I gave you this church because I thought you'd take care of people," he said. "That's what a pastor does. He takes care of people. But I've been watching, Andres. I've been watching for a long time." He paused. "You don't take care of people. You arrange them." Before Andres could open his mouth, another voice came from the other end of the table. Quiet, but clear. He's right. Every head turned. Eloisa was sitting in the same spot she had been all night, but her chin was up and she was looking straight at Andres. "You arrange everything," she said, her voice shaking but not stopping. "The church, the dinners, Hannah, me. You arranged me too, Andres. 23 years and you still point at the salt instead of asking me to pass it. I've been afraid to speak at my own table. I should have said something a long time ago. I'm saying it now. This boy has been nothing but respectful every time Hannah has mentioned him, and you've treated him like dirt because he doesn't come with a check attached." The room was so quiet you could hear the wind pushing against the windows outside. Andres looked from his wife to his father and back again, and I watched the ground disappear under him. He turned to Hannah. She was his last wall, his last chance. "Hannah, I am your father. I have given you everything. Tell me I haven't done right by you." Hannah's eyes filled up. She loved him. You could see it all over her face, the way her lip trembled, but she didn't tell him he was right. "Dad, you've given me everything except the right to choose," she said, tears running down both cheeks. "You chose my church, my friends, my clothes, my future husband. You never once asked me what I wanted, not once." Andres didn't fire back. He didn't argue. He didn't quote scripture. He walked to one of the side chairs, not the head of the table, just a regular chair, and he sat down and put both hands over his face. Chuck walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not trying to take your family from you, son. I'm trying to give it back to you, but you have to stop holding it so tight that you crush it." Andres' shoulders moved once, then again. He was crying. Not the controlled kind, not the kind he could arrange or present to a congregation. Just crying, messy and real, the kind that comes from a place you forgot you had. The room let him. After a long silence, he dropped his hands from his face. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked directly at me. Then he said my name, my actual name, the one he had refused to say for over a year. And then he said, "I owe you an apology. I don't know if I'm ready to mean it all the way yet, but I owe you one, and I know it." Chuck set a proper place for me right next to Hannah. They reheated the food and everyone sat back down. When we finally ate, it was quiet, but not the old kind of quiet where everyone was scared to breathe wrong. This was different. People were chewing and thinking and figuring out how to be in the same room without all the old rules holding everything in place. Hannah held my hand on top of the table, and nobody said a word about it. Eloisa looked across at me and asked if I wanted more sweet potatoes, and she used my name when she said it. Andres didn't talk much for the rest of the meal, but he stayed in his chair and he didn't ask anyone to leave. When I walked out to my car at the end of the night, Chuck followed me onto the porch and shook my hand with the same firm grip as that first time on his porch weeks ago. "You handled yourself well in there, son. Most men would have walked out. The fact that you stayed tells me everything I need to know." I drove home in my one good shirt. Andres had said my name. Eloisa had passed the sweet potatoes. Nobody mentioned the paper plate again.